sign this resignation agreement immediately, or we will terminate you without a single penny. Those were the exact words spoken to me after 22 years of dedicated corporate loyalty. And they gave me less than half an hour to make up my mind. I chose to step down, but I handed them my own written statement containing one single, incredibly precise sentence that changed everything. 5 days later, their general counsel called my phone at 7 a.m. with absolute terror in his voice, begging me to explain what I actually meant by that carefully crafted paragraph. My name is Sarah Vance, and for over 2 decades, I was the principal director of global operations at a massive cloud infrastructure firm based out of Chicago. I started back in July of 2004 as a fresh-faced junior analyst earning $40,000 a year, working 80 hours a week while living in a tiny studio apartment. By late 2025, I was earning nearly $200,000 annually, managing 60 professionals across 3 different continents, and overseeing a division that brought in over $70 million in corporate revenue each year. I was not just another senior executive with an impressive title on her door. I was the ultimate vault of organizational knowledge that kept the entire business running smoothly. Whenever the executive leadership forgot crucial details about our largest enterprise clients, my personal phone would ring instantly. Whenever the finance department needed historical records from 15 years ago that no longer existed on current servers, I pulled them up from my private system. My email archive stretched back 2 decades, and my deep vendor relationships kept our operations completely bulletproof. Through every economic storm, everything began to spiral downwards. Early last year, when our original founders quietly sold the company to a ruthless private equity conglomerate, valued at $11 billion. This firm was notorious for buying up established tech corporations, firing all the experienced staff who earned high salaries, and replacing them with inexperienced graduates who accepted dirt-cheap pay. I had watched this exact corporate restructuring playbook destroy competing companies across our industry over the previous 18 months, so I knew precisely what kind of storm was heading our way. The second the deal was finalized, the new corporate leadership arrived at our downtown headquarters shortly after the buyout closed, led by our newly appointed chief executive, Brandon Hayes. Brandon was 36 years old, holding a fancy business degree from a top university, and possessed 0 practical operational experience after previously driving a heavily funded startup directly into bankruptcy. Alongside him was our new chief financial officer, Julian Reed, who was a brilliant spreadsheet analyst but completely clueless about how real-world supply chains and software infrastructure functioned on a daily operational level. During our first mandatory all-hands staff meeting in early spring, Brandon stood at the front of our main conference room and delivered a polished speech full of false enthusiasm. He promised everyone that our jobs were completely secure, that leadership deeply valued our institutional knowledge, and that no major operational shifts were going to take place. I had heard that exact corporate lie too many times before to actually believe it, so I went home that very evening and quietly began building my defense strategy. My late father had spent 30 years working as a tough union representative fighting for worker rights, and he always taught me to prepare for the absolute worst. When corporate suits started making promises, I began meticulously backing up every single process document, email chain, vendor contract, and internal record onto 3 encrypted external hard drives kept safely at my residence. I knew that when private equity firms decide to purge senior employees, they lock your computer access instantly and strip away all your leverage before you even realize what happened. The systematic terminations began just 4 weeks later, starting with 15 senior employees who were all over 45 years old and earning 6-figure salaries. The company replaced all of them within a few weeks using fresh college graduates who were paid less than half of what the veterans earned. Management publicly called this move an operational modernization effort, but everyone in the building knew it was blatant age discrimination and wage suppression. I kept quiet, performed my duties flawlessly, and quietly documented every single biased comment and suspicious termination notice. By early summer, the new leadership team turned their focus directly onto me by slowly stripping away my core operational responsibilities. They abruptly removed me from high-level strategic planning meetings that I had personally run for nearly a decade. claiming they wanted fresh perspectives in the room. Shortly after that, Brandon reassigned 4 of my critical vendor negotiation projects to a 26-year-old manager who had been with the company for less than 6 months and possessed zero understanding of our legacy architecture. They even openly criticized my management style during a department-wide conference call, trying to make me feel obsolete so I would eventually break down and resign on my own. Corporate intimidation tactics, like that, are designed to force senior workers out without paying out legitimate severance packages, but I refused to give them an easy victory. My performance record was completely flawless across 22 years, featuring multiple company awards and outstanding reviews, meaning they had absolutely no legitimate legal grounds to fire me for cause. Eventually, Julian called me into his office on a rainy Friday afternoon to present a condescending alternative. He informed me that my current directorial position was being eliminated, but offered me a newly created coordinator role that carried a massive pay cut of nearly $100,000 a year. It was a classic case of constructive dismissal disguised as organizational restructuring, so I simply smiled, told him I would consider the offer, and immediately reached out to a top-tier employment attorney named Richard Vance. Richard had spent nearly 30 years fighting corporate, wrongful termination, and age discrimination, cases with an exceptional record of winning massive settlements. After I explained the situation and showed him my documentation, Richard confirmed that management was attempting to trap me into leaving for free. He instructed me to reject their pay cut offer, remain completely silent, continue documenting every single interaction, and wait patiently for executive leadership to make their next desperate move. That final move came a few weeks later when Brandon's assistant abruptly summoned me to a private conference room at 3 p.m. Walking into that room felt like entering a courtroom, with Brandon, Julian, and the senior human resources director sitting behind a long mahogany table with matching leather portfolios. They gestured toward a single chair on the opposite side of the table, clearly expecting me to be terrified and willing to accept whatever scraps they threw at me. Brandon started the meeting with rehearsed sympathy, explaining that leadership had decided to take the operations department in a completely different direction. Julian then slid a manila folder across the polished table, presenting 2 options that had already been drawn up by their legal team. Option 1 was for me to sign an immediate resignation document in exchange for 3 weeks of basic severance pay, while option 2 was an immediate termination for corporate redundancy that would yield 0 severance and a marked employment record. I opened the folder and reviewed the pre-written resignation document, which explicitly stated that I relinquished all legal rights to sue the company for wrongful termination or discrimination in exchange for that tiny payout. They sat there smirking, completely confident that they had trapped me with nowhere to turn. I remembered my father's advice about never letting corporate suits bully you, looked them dead in the eye, and calmly announced that I would be resigning, but only using my own custom-written resignation letter. Brandon tried to insist that I use their standard legal template, but I held my ground and reminded him that he could not legally force me to sign his specific words. I walked out of that conference room, locked myself in my private office, and pulled up a precise sentence statement that Richard and I had crafted over several legal consultation sessions. I printed the letter on official corporate stationery, signed it cleanly in dark ink, made several personal copies, and returned to the conference room to hand it over. They barely glanced at the paper before celebrating their easy win, completely failing to analyze the specific wording written on the page. I quietly packed my desk items into 3 cardboard boxes, ignored the flood of text messages coming from my confused team members, and drove home to wait for their legal department to finally realize what they had just signed. 5 days later, my phone rang at 7 a.m, with their corporate general counsel on the line, sounding completely panicked. He demanded to know what I meant by making my resignation conditional upon receiving a complete settlement of all compensation, stock options, and benefits legally owed under my employment contract. I opened my master spreadsheet containing 63 detailed tabs and explained that under state contract law, a conditional resignation does not take effect until every single financial obligation is satisfied in full. That meant I was still an active employee earning my daily salary, accumulating benefits, and retaining full legal standing while they figured out their mistake. I calmly read through the breakdown of what they owed me under my original 22-year executive contract. Between my base salary, accrued vacation time, earned performance bonuses, vested equity options triggered by the buyout, and contractual severance pay, the grand total came out to over $1.6 million. On top of that, statutory interest was accruing daily, and I was still accumulating my full daily wage while technically remaining on the official payroll. When their attorney threatened to fight me in court, I reminded him that I possessed 22 years of archived records, recorded meetings, and internal emails, explicitly proving systematic age discrimination and corporate misconduct. I offered them a clear choice: either pay the full contractual settlement immediately or face a public lawsuit while paying my full salary every single day the litigation dragged on. The lawyer hung up the phone in complete shock, realizing his executive team had walked right into an unavoidable trap. A few hours later, Julian called me back in a furious rage, screaming that I had tricked them and demanding that I drop my claims immediately. I pleasantly pointed out that 4 executive professionals had sat in that conference room and accepted my conditional resignation without bothering to read the single sentence written on the paper. I also informed him that I had already filed a formal complaint with federal employment regulators regarding their systematic firing of older workers across the entire organization. By the end of the day, corporate leadership realized they had zero leverage left and officially requested a private settlement, meeting to resolve the situation. After rejecting their initial lowball offers, I successfully secured a full payout of $1.7 million, along with a glowing written recommendation signed by Brandon himself and coverage for all my legal fees. The funds were wired directly to my bank account within 3 weeks, and my resignation officially took effect only after every dollar was delivered. 7 months after I walked away with my settlement, Brandon was quietly fired by the board for failing to meet basic revenue targets after purging all the experienced talent. The company lost several major enterprise clients because nobody left in the building knew how to operate the legacy infrastructure or manage vendor contracts properly. I now spend my time working as an independent advisor, helping senior professionals protect their rights, document corporate misconduct, and secure the full compensation they truly deserve.